Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. I can't help but notice that a massive shift is underway, a shift in opinion towards Israel. And it's notable, especially in the West. Two-thirds of the world already recognize Palestine, but in recent weeks, Canada, France, and the UK made headlines suggesting they will join that group next month at the United Nations. Australia hasn't formally made an announcement, but it's notable that last weekend, about 250,000 people marched on the Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of Palestine. And then there's America. Poll after poll shows declining support for Israel's military action in Gaza. An Economist YouGov survey released this week shows 84% of Americans favor an immediate ceasefire. 70% believe there's a hunger crisis in Gaza. 45% believe Israel is committing a genocide. You could ask if these shifts matter. The United States boycotted last week's UN conference on the two-state solution. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to fully reoccupy the Gaza Strip. So, what is the point? In a moment, I will put that question to my guest. If you're new to FP Live, welcome. We take some subscriber questions throughout, as always. And if you are not yet a member, use the code FP Live for a discount. We're also a podcast. Just look for FP Live on your favorite audio platform. So, what shifted the international attitude towards Israel? Why now? And will it have any effect inside the country itself? Joining me now is Daniel Levy, a former Israeli peace negotiator under Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Ehud Barak. He is the co-founder of the advocacy group J Street and the president of the U.S. Middle East Project. Daniel, welcome to FP Live.
It's good to be with you, Ravi.
The pleasure is ours. So I want to start with those British, French, and Canadian plans to recognize Palestine. 147 UN member states had already done so. On the face of it, two or three more countries shouldn't change that much, but it's clearly angered Israel. It's annoyed America. What do you make of it?
Well, these are, first of all, let's acknowledge two members of the P5, the UN Security Council, the UK and France. These are Israeli allies. These are countries that continue to consider themselves as Israeli allies, key trade partners, the places where Israelis go when they leave the country on vacation, for business and other things. But I'm going to suggest to you, Ravi, that there is perhaps less here than meets the eye, and maybe we'll unpack that later on. My understanding of the intentionality behind recognition on the part of the countries you mentioned, UK, France, Canada, others, I think likely to join. Those are likely to go ahead in September as planned. Others are likely to join. My suggestion would be that the intentionality is for this to be a gesture on their part that does not lead to further measures, but is a way of responding to public pressure to take action in a way that does not overly disrupt the existing bilateral relations with Israel. The question that one has to ask is that having recognized the state of Palestine, a largely symbolic gesture, I don't think they're going to even speak about what borders they're recognizing that state under. Having recognized, what will the measures that are taken after that, given that the state they are recognizing is under permanent, and according to the International Court of Justice as of July 19th, 2024, permanent illegal occupation? My guess is they hope that there will not be further measures. This will be enough to stave off that pressure. My expectation is that having taken the step of recognition, the pressure will only intensify because those who have called for recognition will say, wait a minute, we recognized, nothing changed. What are you going to do next? I would perhaps draw an analogy and suggest that recognition almost became a piece of traffic that you have to pass through in order to do other things. The intention is to park there in that traffic, but that may not be something they can pull off. And maybe we'll come on to what are the more significant measures that might capture Israel's attention, because my sense is that inside Israel, this will be attacked, this will be vilified, People will be angry, but they will also know that this is okay. This is something they can manage. And in fact, in that respect, it's a bit like the old peace process where everyone is
Mm.
playing a prescribed role. You know, the countries that are recognizing say they're flexing muscle. Israel gets angry, which makes it easier for them to say, look, we're doing something serious. The Palestinian Authority, which has no, we might talk about them, has no real independent strategy, feels good for a few days.
Right.
And then that's
Um,
where we leave things.
and Daniel, the one of the things you said there was that there's pressure from people, and in some senses, you've got the likes of Macron in France and Starmer in the UK feeling like they need to respond to that pressure in some way. And many of our subscribers have written in about this as well, saying that, well, it's a form of virtue signaling, and I'm guessing that you're agreeing with that as well. The question then is that if this doesn't change anything and the public pressure is real, let's say, let's confine ourselves to the UK and France for now, that public pressure isn't going anywhere. And it may see these kinds of moves as the virtue signaling that it actually is.
Right. So let's also acknowledge that alongside recognition, there are slightly different maneuvers that are going on, whether you're in Paris or London. So I think Macron, he had a conference he was hosting. He was hoping to make that a big deal, co-hosting with the Saudis in New York at the UN. I think they're hoping that Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman will attend now in September. Macron and Mohammed bin Salman could have some kind of big event there. And Macron is trying to use this to say, well, we've recognized Palestine, so maybe you should move forward your normalization with Israel. And perhaps to score some chits rather than take some hits from Washington as a subsequence, as a consequence of that. Keir Starmer, I think, is much more the direct pressure coming from within his party, within his voting constituency. Unlike Macron, he still has to think about his own political future. Labour is bleeding, the Labour Party in the UK, just 1 year after an election, is bleeding support, which wasn't that broad anyway, massive parliamentary majority on 34% of the popular vote. They're bleeding support across the board. So Starmer felt he had to do something. But uh, in terms of that pressure and where does this go next, unless, and I don't think it's something that will change, unless something dramatic changes on the Israeli side, what we see and what we've seen in the tiny amount of time since those announcements has just been an intensification of Israel further alienating itself from those who have already made that decision. It feels, Ravi, like a cultural zeitgeist has set in here,
Mm.
that a Rubicon has been crossed. And therefore, the very measures that I think those countries are keen to avoid may push themselves further on the agenda. Now, if you'd have asked me a year ago, I probably would have said to you, if they recognize, then this gets stuck, perhaps for the rest of Starmer's term in office, for instance, which is 4 years, similar amounts of time elsewhere. Now I'm far from being sure of that. And so there are things like a full ban on arms, uh, limiting other elements of trade. Settlement trade, anything to do with the illegal Israeli settlements, very low bar. What about visas? Should Israelis sign declarations that they have not been active in the commissioning of war crimes in order to enter European countries? At the moment, Israel has visa-free travel. What about, and this was an interesting piece in the FT just a few weeks ago by Martin Sandbu, where he said, for Europe to be credible, we have to replicate some of what was done with Russia, not totally analogous situations. But what about the significant Israeli assets being held in European
Mm.
institutions, European banks? All of these kinds of things, a sports boycott, all of these kinds of things are on the agenda, and I think will be further on the agenda once that parking space of
Mm.
recognition looks increasingly squeezed and
So
inadequate.
there's one important element here, the United States, and let's jump there because, as we know, I mean, you used Russia as a not completely analogous analogy, but let's go there. Nothing happens without the United States, and of course, the U.S. remains Israel's strongest, biggest ally. The administration's opinion is not shifting, but as I was saying earlier, public opinion in America is shifting. American views of Israel's actions in Gaza are basically at an all-time low at this point. A majority of Americans think Israel's continued attacks on Gaza are unjustified. Nearly half of all Americans think a genocide is underway. So I have two questions here, Daniel. Why do you think this shift is taking place? And then why did it take so long?
Gosh, the latter is how many hours do we have, Ravi?
Well, let's tackle
Uh,
let's tackle the why.
okay. Um, So on the why, I think this is fascinating, and I'm still digging into it myself. These structures of permission to narrate, of the signals that people respond to from each other that somehow build up, and then the dam is broken. And I get the sense that that is the story of the last few weeks.